When you begin to understand why others seek your validation, you also begin to understand the architecture of human insecurity, the subtle fears people carry, and the illusions that govern so much of our behavior. Many walk through life unaware that the approval they chase is nothing more than a reflection of their own uncertainty. They look outward because they have not yet learned to stand firmly inward. They measure their worth through the gaze of others because they have not yet learned the weight of their own judgment. And so they extend their hands toward you, hoping you will confirm what they cannot confirm within themselves. But their search for your validation is less about you and more about the emptiness they fear confronting alone. Validation becomes a currency among those who do not feel rich in spirit. They look for signs that they belong, that they matter, that their choices are justified, and that their actions are accepted. When the world grows loud with expectations, when society tells them they must fit a certain mold, they cling to external approval as if it were a compass. And when your voice rises above others, when your presence carries weight or your confidence exposes what they lack, they begin to lean on you, as if your words determine their place in the world. But their reliance is not a compliment to your strength. It is a reminder of their fragility. People seek your validation because it is easier than building their own. It is easier to ask you whether they are enough than to confront the internal obstacles that prevent them from believing it. It is easier to borrow strength than to forge it. And it is easier to chase the fleeting comfort of your approval than to cultivate the enduring stability of self-respect. But the tragedy lies in how this pursuit enslaves them to opinions, rendering them vulnerable to the slightest shift in the winds of perception. Yet, if their dependence on your validation holds them captive, your desire to provide it can hold you captive as well. For when you begin to measure your value by how much others look to you, you place your freedom in their hands. You become entangled in their emotional storms, responsible for their reassurance, obligated to maintain their comfort. You become the sun around which their confidence orbits, and in doing so, you allow their needs to eclipse your own clarity. But there is no peace in carrying the insecurities of others on your shoulders. There is only exhaustion. To understand why others seek your validation, you must recognize that people are often shaped more by fear than intention. Fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of failure, fear of being unseen. These fears lead them outward, searching for confirmation that they are accepted, that they are understood, that they are safe. And when they perceive you as someone steady, disciplined, or internally anchored, they assume your judgment is worth more than their own. But this is an illusion. No judgment holds more power over a person than the one they give to themselves. And yet, so few ever realize this. Your role is not to feed their dependency, but to guide them toward independence. True strength never lies in keeping others attached to you, but in helping them stand on their own 2 feet. When someone seeks your validation, they are not asking for truth. They are asking for comfort. They want the soft reassurance that they are on the right path even when they have not committed themselves to walking it with discipline. They want to silence the noise within them, the doubt that whispers they are not enough. But if you offer validation freely, without challenging them to develop their own judgment, you do not help them grow. You help them remain weak, and so the wise person understands this dance. They do not harden their heart, nor do they indulge every cry for approval. Instead, they respond with clarity. They remind others that peace does not come from the outside. They remind them that no amount of external praise will make an untrained mind quiet. They remind them that validation becomes meaningless if the one receiving it cannot uphold it with their own actions. And they remind them that personal worth cannot be outsourced. There will always be people who look to you for confirmation. Some will do it openly, seeking your advice or your opinion. Others will do it silently, watching your reactions, interpreting your expressions, craving signs that you approve of them. But in both cases, their need arises from the same root, uncertainty. When people do not trust themselves, they trust the nearest voice that sounds confident. They surrender their judgment, believing someone else must know better than they do. This is not a flaw to resent, but a condition to understand. Yet you must remember that their search for validation says nothing about your obligation to provide it. Recognition of their struggle does not require you to shoulder it. Compassion does not require self-sacrifice. You are not responsible for filling the empty places inside others. You are responsible only for strengthening the structure within yourself. And the more you do so, the more others will try to use you as a mirror. They will look into your steadiness and hope it reflects something reassuring back to them. But you cannot allow your sense of self to become entangled with their longing. To see clearly why others seek your validation, consider how few people ever examine themselves honestly. Most avoid self-reflection because it reveals truths that are uncomfortable. It is easier to ask you whether they are doing well than to confront the fact that their discipline falters, their intentions waver, or their actions contradict their values. They want you to tell them they are strong, instead of doing the work required to become strong. They want you to say they are right, instead of learning how to judge situations responsibly. They want you to calm their emotions instead of learning how to govern them. This is why your validation feels powerful to them. Not because you hold some mystical authority, but because they have neglected their own. But the wise person never allows the admiration of others to distort their sense of identity. They do not inflate themselves because others seek their approval, nor do they dismiss the insecurities that cause such dependence. Instead, they remain grounded. They remember that validation is not a substitute for virtue. Praise is not a substitute for mastery. Approval is not a substitute for character. And you, too, must guard your mind against the subtle traps hidden in this dynamic. When others treat your validation as valuable, your ego may begin to believe it is. You may start to speak in ways that cater to their expectations rather than express truth. You may begin to fear their disappointment, adjusting your behavior to avoid conflict, and in doing so, you exchange your autonomy for their comfort. What begins as a desire to help them becomes a hidden chain binding you to their perceptions. But freedom requires that you remain anchored in your own reason, not in the desires of others. You must understand, people seek your validation because you carry yourself in a way that suggests you know what you're doing. Whether or not you feel this internally does not matter. Your actions, your discipline, your calmness in adversity, these qualities create an impression of inner certainty. And because so many lack this certainty themselves, they assume that if they align with you, they too will feel steady. But steadiness is not contagious. It cannot be transferred through approval. It can only be earned through self-governance. When someone turns to you for validation, they are attempting to anchor their instability to your stability. It is an act born from insecurity, not admiration. It is an attempt to find direction without taking responsibility for their own judgment. But life does not reward such shortcuts. A person who relies on others to define their worth will always live in fear of losing them. They will become dependent on the shifting evaluations of the world, forever chasing approvals that fade as quickly as they appear. And the more they rely on external validation, the weaker they become. And yet, there is something important to observe. The fact that people seek your validation demonstrates that you hold influence. But influence is not authority, and it is not superiority. Influence is simply the natural result of living with intention. Others see this and assume you possess answers they do not. But the truth is that you have simply learned to navigate your own mind, and in doing so, you have become a reference point for those who have not. Influence is not something to boast about. It is something to handle with responsibility. You must not allow their reliance to corrupt your humility. When your validation becomes meaningful to others, you may be tempted to believe that your opinion carries more weight than it truly does. But wisdom requires that you see yourself clearly. Your perspective is one among many. Your insight is shaped by your experiences, not universal truth. Your clarity is a result of your practice, not an inherent authority. And so you must treat your influence not as a crown, but as a reminder to remain grounded. People seek your validation because validation feels like a shortcut to self-worth. But shortcuts never lead to true transformation. If someone feels lost, your approval may comfort them for a moment, but it will never provide direction. If someone feels inadequate, your reassurance may soothe them temporarily, but it will never strengthen their character. And if someone feels uncertain, your encouragement may calm their fears, but it will never give them clarity. Only their own discipline can do that. External validation is a fragile foundation upon which to build identity. It is like constructing a house on sand. As long as the weather is calm, the structure stands. But the moment a storm arrives, it collapses. A person who depends on validation will always crumble under pressure, because they have never learned to rely on themselves. And this is why the wise person refrains from feeding such dependency. They offer guidance, but not dependency. They offer insight, but not rescue. They offer clarity, but not identity. Understanding why others seek your validation is not about judging them. It is about recognizing the universal human struggle to develop internal stability. Some have begun this journey, others have not. But each person is responsible for their own growth. Your role is not to carry them, but to encourage them to walk. And if they insist on depending on your approval, you must not let yourself be entangled in their fears. Compassion must never become captivity. You, too, must remain vigilant against the desire to seek validation from others. For the moment you begin to need their approval, you lose the freedom that comes from self-governance. The opinions of others may offer feedback, but they must never define you. If you allow their praise to exalt you, you will allow their criticism to destroy you. If you let their expectations guide you, you will abandon your path. And if you let their validation determine your worth, you will never know the quiet strength that comes from self-respect. The only validation that matters is the one rooted in your own reason, your own discipline, and your own actions. When your behavior aligns with your values, when your intentions are guided by virtue, when your choices stem from clarity rather than fear, you no longer need anyone's approval. You live in accordance with your nature, governed by principles that cannot be taken away. And from this internal strength, true independence is born. People seek your validation because they have not yet learned how to validate themselves. They look to you for reassurance, because they have not yet built the foundation of self-trust. They depend on your judgment, because they have not yet refined their own. But this is their journey, not yours. You cannot walk it for them. You cannot think for them. You cannot feel for them. You cannot replace the inner work they must do to become whole. Your task is simply to remain steady, to live with intention, to cultivate your own clarity, and to embody the strength they have yet to discover. And in doing so, you become not a source of validation, but a reminder that the power they seek is already within them.